Okay, the question was, I'll repeat the question. I mentioned during my remarks that I was stunned, and one of the greatest lessons of my time at Knesset was how much unity there is behind the scenes, religious, secular, etc. The question was, what about member of Knesset Zawabi? So, I'll get to her in a moment. The whole Israeli-Arab issue is actually something which I learned a lot about during my time at Knesset. The first moment I learned about it was actually during the inauguration. We finished the inauguration and we sang Hatikva at the end of the inauguration. When I was in Knesset, there wasn't a joint Arab list. There were 4 different Arab parties. And the Arab members of Knesset walked out for Hatikva, and one stayed in. Asawi Fresh from the Meretz party. He stayed in. So I saw that Asawi stayed in. I stood up respectfully. So I went over to him afterwards and I said, I want to learn more about this, about Israeli Arabs and the situation, and let's have a coffee, and we did. And Asawi opened my eyes to something I didn't think about before. And again, I'll get to Zawabi in a moment. He said, I'd rather live in Israel than any other country in the Middle East. And I'll say that openly. He said, but it's still difficult to be an Arab in a country which is a Jewish state, where all the symbols are Jewish, where the national anthem talks about 2,000 years of Jewish aspirations to return to the land. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we change our national anthem or our symbols. But talking to him, I thought to myself, when I was growing up in America, and as a kid, I went to ball games and proudly took off my hat for the national anthem, what would I have felt like if that national anthem was Christian in nature? I would have felt uncomfortable. It wouldn't have been easy. And I'm not saying that we should change anything other than we do have to be more sensitive to the situation of Israeli Arabs. Israeli Arabs who want to live in Israel. Remember, it's 20% of our country. It's not some small little minority, 20% of the country. And I do believe that we have to go overboard to make sure that their needs are met, that they have full equality. I'll be honest with you, I traveled through some Arab villages. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be improved. We could do more to make them feel comfortable in Israel. But I would hope that their representatives in Knesset would be there fighting for them to have that equality. And sadly, too many of the Arab members of Knesset don't do that. Asawi does. But too many don't, and they really are there focusing on the nationalistic issues on behalf of the Palestinians. And that's a whole different area. And it's a tragedy for Israeli Arabs that they don't have, and hopefully they'll learn to have members who are more moderate and really represent their needs. When member of Knesset Zawabi spoke, I walked out of the room. I didn't walk out of the room out of a protest boycott. I walked out of the room because if I'm in the room, I have to scream at her, right, for what she's saying. You can't sit there and listen to that and not respond, and that's exactly what she wants. She wants the clip of Jewish MKs screaming at her and getting all angry. That's what she wants. So that's what I think is the best response. People ask me, why don't we throw them out of Knesset? And it's a deliberate decision the Knesset makes not to throw them out. Because whatever damage they could do to Israel by standing at the podium and saying the horrible things that are said, pales in comparison to the damage that will be done if Israel is throwing elected representatives out of the Knesset. It's a democracy. We give them the right to vote, and we have to let them be. But I'll tell you this, member of Knesset Zawabi is not going to be in the next Knesset. Her party rejected her. She didn't make it in the primaries for the next elections. And that's a good sign. That means that the Israeli Arab population is realizing that having extremist Knesset members like this is not helpful. But it's a challenge, it's not easy. You learn to work together with some of them. There were a few that I worked together with on some of the environmental issues and health issues, and some that I just couldn't have anything to do with, and she's an example. I just couldn't have any level of working together with her. Yes?
I just want to say, they shouldn't cry so much that it's a Jewish country, so hard for them. I grew up in a Catholic country until the age of 10, you know, with Santa Claus, the works. As Jews, we didn't feel threatened. We were welcome there. It was fine. In the legislature in Quebec, they have a cross in the legislative building. It doesn't affect anything.
Okay. First of all, different people can react differently to the issue of what it feels like. I can understand, though. I'm not saying they should walk out during the national anthem. I'm not saying they should reject the country. I'm just saying I do believe that we should go overboard to make sure that they feel comfortable, and we don't. We don't. We talk a lot about the equality. We don't. There's a lot of things that we can do a lot better to make sure that they feel comfortable, again, and draw the line between those who want to be upstanding citizens of the state and those who are actually enemies of the state from within. There's a big difference. But for those who want to be, I think we do. And by the way, I do hope we reach a point where we demand service from Israeli Arabs as well. Not military service, but they should be doing national service as well. There's a lot of needs of the Arab community. They could be doing Sherut Leumi. It absolutely should be happening, and we should reach the point where we demand that. They should be, the same way they get benefits from the state, they should have the obligations to the state, and hopefully we can get to that point. Yes?
You spoke during your speech about how you were surprised at how even the secular Israelis, how much they knew and how much they were involved and how much, certainly with some of the major rituals, how much it meant to them. Can you perhaps translate to us, who are pre-Aliyah type people, to the less religious Jews who we meet in our society here? Or maybe perhaps it's different on this side of the pond.
Yeah, it's completely different. Meaning, I have extended family throughout the States, secular Jews, people who have zero connection at all, on any level religiously. What I found in Israel, and it's part of, I actually thought to myself on Shabbat, and spoke about it on Shabbat, God did not appear to Avram Avinu until he came to the land of Israel. In Lech Lecha, it says, Vayomer Hashem el Avram Lech Lecha. He spoke to him. He communicated with him. But the term Vayera Elav Hashem only happens once he comes. The Kli Yakar says that God's presence does not dwell outside the land of Israel. He could not appear to Abraham outside the land of Israel. I really believe it's part of that. There's something in the air where quote-unquote secular people connect. Now, I will say, when the state was founded, there's no doubt that the founders of the state of Israel, the secular founders, wanted a state that was completely devoid of Torah, God, mitzvot. Many people, and I've heard it from Yair Lapid as well, believe that in 1967, that's where it changed. That even the secular Israelis, Six-Day War, they saw this happen, and something stirred inside of them, and they realized, okay, there's something else at work over here. And there are other forces that are working over here, and the belief in God is there. And I'm telling you, I was shocked. People who I never would have imagined had connection. They really did. They do, again, on a spectrum, different. We also started the first BAYT Midrash in the Knesset. It was from our party, from Yesh Atid, where members would come every Tuesday and study together. There's a lot of that. And there's a reawakening in Israel in general. That's, by the way, part of why I'm so against the religious coercion. Because I feel that the religious coercion pushes people further away, even if they'd be open to it. And if we would just pull back a little bit on the coercion, I think you'd see an absolute renaissance in people who'd be embracing far more by choice, instead of the feeling they have. And Chazal talk about, when you're forced to something, there's an automatic reflex to push away from it. I think we'd see a renaissance in terms of spiritual life in Israel. Right now in Tel Aviv, you won't believe what's going on. They have Kabbalat Shabbat all over Tel Aviv, not the way we do it, but they have these ceremonies all over Tel Aviv. People at Kabbalat Shabbat on the beach. But everywhere you go, they're having these things. I mean, for me, the greatest moment was my wife and I had this crazy idea. We thought it was crazy. Purim was coming, and we were thinking to ourselves, who should we have for the Purim Suda? And we said, you know what, let's give this a try. And I sent an email to our entire party, and I said, anybody want to come to our house for Purim Suda? Yair Lapid was the first person to respond. He responded within 20 seconds, and he did a reply all, so everyone else would see it. And he said, "Anachnu magiim halapidim." That's what he wrote. We're coming, and of course everybody else wanted to come. And I'm sitting there in Beit Shemesh, having a Purim Suda with our entire party. We had this amazing discussion. Ruth Calderon came and gave this whole thing about the feminism of Vashti versus the feminism of Esther. And we're talking about Mordechai, and we're talking about hidden miracles, and what hidden miracles Israel has experienced. I mean, it was unbelievable. And it's really happened. I don't see that happening in the diaspora. I see there's something about being in Israel and being in a Jewish state, wherever we return, things are Jewish, where people are connected that way. So I wouldn't be able to see how to transfer it to diaspora Jewry the same way. Yes?
And do Arabs get to serve in the army? Are they allowed? Or
Arabs are allowed to serve in the army. There's actually a higher percentage than you believe. I don't know the exact number, but it's higher numbers than there's ever been Arabs serving in the army. Remember, the Druze serving the army as well. And there's a lot of change that's happening even amongst Israeli Arabs. More and more coming and serving the army. What's that?
Christian Arabs, I think.
No, the Christian Arabs do it almost completely. You're actually having Muslims now who are serving the army as well. Again, it's complicated. It's not a simple situation. There's no obligation to do so, but little by little you're seeing more and more that are actually joining and getting involved. Just see if anybody else who hasn't asked yet. Okay. Oh, yes.
The recent vote of votes in UNESCO stating that the Jews have no connection whatsoever to Yerushalayim or Israel. First of all, it's horrible, but it was so one-sided. You would think they would say Jews have certain rights, but Muslims have many more rights. And decided that it was so lopsided that it was inspiring. To me, it presented a wonderful opportunity for the Israeli government to respond, for the Jews all over to respond, to see how history is being erased, Jewish history is being rewritten. Is there anything being done in Israel to use that as an inspirational moment to aggressively?
It's a great question. I wrote a column after the UNESCO vote for the Jerusalem Post saying that the greatest response to the UNESCO vote was what happened right afterwards, which was the holiday of Sukkot. The greatest response. Because there's this deep connection between Sukkot and our connection to Har HaBayit. Let's remember, Shlomo HaMelech, when did he dedicate the first Beit HaMikdash? On Sukkot. When Ezra and Nehemiah, the second Beit HaMikdash, it was Sukkot. And the only time that the Torah says that you have an obligation to rejoice in the Beit HaMikdash for the entire holiday is Sukkot. Every other Chag, you go, you bring a korban, you can leave. Sukkot, it's v'samachta, to be there for all 7 days, to be there and celebrating. What greater response could there be? And I remember the feeling, because we go to be Ola Regel with our family during Chol HaMoed, and walking, the streets were packed. Thousands and thousands of people going to the Kotel. And by the way, not just Jews, you also have the Christian pilgrimage during the Feast of Tabernacles, where some 70,000 were in the streets of Jerusalem. And that's the greatest response that there could be. So in terms of within Israel itself, you did have a very high percentage of ministers and members of Knesset from all parties rejecting it. You know, the United Nations, I don't know how to say this nicely, but we don't really take it seriously on any level. It has no real impact on Israel. Again, there are times, limited situations where it could, and that's a little bit scary in terms of the Security Council. But outside of that, you know, the UN Human Rights Council this past year passed 67 resolutions against Israel for human rights violations. The rest of the world was 61 combined. I mean, how can anybody with any kind of intellectual honesty, and by the way, when I go to college campuses, that's what I talk about. I say, you can criticize Israel. You can criticize Israel. I'm not a person who's going to stand up and say, Israel's always right, there are things we can do better, and that's fine. Just like I can criticize Canada, I can criticize the United States, because all countries do things that are wrong. That's fine. But when you look at these numbers, when hundreds of thousands of people are being slaughtered in Syria and fleeing to Israel for medical treatment, there's something which is off there. So we use it in that way. But within Israel, hopefully over time, there'll be more and more education to the average Israeli about our connection to Yerushalayim. There's not enough. They do bring the soldiers most of the time. Most soldiers end up visiting Yerushalayim, learning about the significance of Yerushalayim, and I hope to see more and more in the education system. We started, during the 19th Knesset, something in the secular schools called Jewish identity. We have to be very careful. The secular community, like I said, is very nervous about religious coercion. You don't want to be teaching halacha, you don't want to be teaching anything where they feel like you're forcing your way of life on them. So we call it Jewish identity. And thank God, thousands and thousands of secular students are now learning about their Jewish identity and why they're in the land of Israel, and hopefully that will spread to all the schools. Yes?
Can you talk a bit about progress being made in terms of Haredim for Tzahal and for employment, and have things gone
Sure.
a step back, or?
It's an incredibly exciting time in terms of Haredim and the progress in terms of integration. My focus was Haredi employment, and I really, to see how you're touching people's lives. And there was one guy, a Belzer Chassid, came to my office to give, his wife made this little gift to say thank you, because we helped him get training and get a job. And the way he said it to me was incredible. He said, I went to work for a month, and at the end of this month, this large amount of money was put into my bank account. And I have food, I have money to buy my children food and clothing. And I saw it, and one friend tells another friend, and there's a revolution happening on the Haredi street. Thousands are working. Haredi male employment has crossed 50% for the first time in decades. And that's not something which can stop, meaning the government policies can't really stop that. It tinkered with it a little bit because when the stipends were returned completely, so it makes it somewhat financially worthwhile not to work, but they're getting the taste of what it means to work. And by the way, secular Israel is giving them the chance to work. That was a big part of the effort also. Secular companies, CEOs didn't want to hire Haredim. So we had to sit with them and convince them to hire Haredim. And one anecdote which captures the progress, even though, again, I'm not saying this is utopia yet. One CEO who didn't want to hire Haredim told me that a Hasidic fellow in his company made a bar mitzvah in Beitar and invited all the secular members as well in the department to come to the bar mitzvah. And for those who know the Haredi community, for a Haredi person to invite secular people to his bar mitzvah in their neighborhood without any demands about how they dress or anything else, that's real progress. And the reverse happened as well, where a Chiloni, a secular member of the company, got married and asked two of the Hasidim to be his witnesses under the chuppah. So again, one small little story. I'm not saying it's widespread, but there's a lot of progress on work. In terms of the army, we knew there was going to be backlash when the legislation was passed. The legislation is actually very pro-Haredi in nature. It doesn't force anyone to go to the army. There's nobody going into yeshivot and pulling guys out and going to jail. None of that's happening. There's goals per year that are set out for army service and national service for guys who aren't learning day and night. And unfortunately, amongst the 55,000 guys in the yeshivot that are using the exemption, there's a high percentage that are not learning day and night. After a few years, it's time to move on. And so the numbers are higher than ever before in terms of Haredim serving the army, and that number will continue to increase for sure. The other issue is general studies and higher education. There are 10,000 Haredim in higher education today, higher than ever before. There is some pushback there, and I'm actually fighting hard for the Haredim, where there's some elements in the secular society that are saying they can come to our universities, but they have to be students like everybody else. And we don't want to have special accommodations made for them. And I obviously disagree strongly with that. I feel let them go to college, but they can have separate classes if that's what they want. And if they don't want to have female teachers, I want to be sensitive to their needs as well, the same way we are in the army. And so that's big progress made. The one area where there's a step backwards is in general education. We made progress during our term. We passed a law which was slowly being implemented. It wasn't in one shot, which offered the Haredim 100% funding for their schools, which they never had before, if they teach math and English in their schools. That's what we were asking for, math and English. And if they didn't, then their funding would go down to 35%. That was basically the situation. And again, there was controversy about that. You know, do you have the right to pull away funding because they don't want to teach what you want them to teach? And I can hear both sides of the equation. I just know the high numbers of Haredim who are dropping out of courses in college and training courses because they don't have math and English. So I'm like at the end of the story. And Rabbi Yosef's daughter, Adina Bar Yosef, she said to me, she said, do one thing in the Knesset. Make sure that every single child learns math and English. One thing. She said, that's the one thing which they need. She's the head of the College for Haredim in Yerushalayim that was started with her father's blessing. And so that has been a setback in the current government. And there's always, you know, you move forward, you have steps backwards, and that's the way it works sometimes. But overall, I would say that we're in a very positive swing. It'll take a few generations, but the goal is that there'll be Haredim, lawyers, accountants, generals in the army, you know, throughout the country, and hopefully we'll get there. Yes?
One of the army flashpoints I've heard a few times about Kol Isha. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the issues that's raised is soldiers sitting in ceremonies and women singing. I think we should go out of our way if there's a ceremony which is specifically with religious soldiers to make sure that there's no woman singing in front of them. If there's a ceremony which is for the broader army, you know, the chief rabbis at times find themselves sitting in situations where women are singing, and you deal with it. You deal with it the same way. You be respectful, but we should try. But certainly not make a scene. Certainly, if a woman has been scheduled, don't embarrass her by canceling it and making a big scene about it. These are things which, again, they push secular Israel further and further away when these things happen. I think you have to think sometimes nationally about some of these decisions. So again, to be sensitive, I'm a big advocate, and there are people who are against it, that they should not have to have any commanders who are female. Go out of your way to make sure. I'm all for if women want to advance in the army, that's fine, but it shouldn't be the religious units. It shouldn't be that way. They should have their spiritual needs met, and that's something which is important. I visited one of the bases of Nahal Haredi, and I asked the soldiers how they're doing religiously. And one of them said a fascinating answer. He said, I'm doing great religiously. He said, if I don't show up for Shacharit in this program, I'm thrown out of the program. In yeshiva, you know. So there's positives and negatives. But I will tell you in closing, and then I'll stick around for any other questions people have. All these questions that we're asking right now, this is also part of the greatness of the times in which we live. Think about this, right? We're debating controversial issues about what should a Jewish state look like in 2016. Unbelievable. How blessed we are that these are the controversies that we have, right? We're not figuring out how to get out of the Tsar's army and how to protect our kids from being completely lost by being taken away to who knows where. We're talking about, you know, B'nai Torah, how many should be learning, how should they serve in the army, when they're in the army, how do we make sure that they stay religious and they have learning, and let's remember also that when they go and they fight, they're fighting for the Jewish people, and that's the greatest blessing that there could be, and like I said before, hopefully we can all recognize that this is a symbol of the greatness of the times in which we live. So thank you so much again for coming.